Hello! I went around a few times debating in my head whether or not I really wanted to film this video and what value it would even bring if I sent it out into the world, but then I stopped thinking so hard about it. And ultimately, I feel like I do just want to talk about this candidly and share my experiences. If it helps even one person to understand others better or to have some guidance on what to do if they feel similarly, then it's worth it. So today I wanted to talk about where I went and how I changed. For those close to me or who follow me on Instagram or TikTok, where I've talked about this before, this won't come as a huge shock, but back in November 2021, I was diagnosed as autistic at the big old age of 22. By that time, this didn't come as a huge shock to me necessarily, but I actually have a video of the phone call where I found out that I was autistic. I'll put it in here, I guess. Autism reveal! Yay! Like a gender reveal, but it's yes or no whether you're autistic.
Yeah, what would the quality check be for? Okay. Okay, I get you. I just wasn't sure what that meant, but yeah, okay. Yeah. No, that sounds fine. Thank you. That's fine. Alright, bye-bye.
Jokes aside, what I managed to capture there was a really cathartic, but obviously also quite an upsetting moment. I'd worked quite hard to get to that point in my life and to understand myself better. And I guess I wanted to share a little more about how I got to that stage and where I am now. I, at the same time, wanted to explain where I went on YouTube and the shift in my more recent videos, which, if you've been following me for a while since I started making YouTube videos, that's a decade ago. That's wild. It's changed. The content I make has changed. But first, let's go a little while back. When I was around 15 to 17 years old, I built a somewhat niche but pretty dedicated audience on Instagram and in turn Tumblr when I did cosplay and I took selfies and I was probably considered a little bit more attractive than I am now. And a lot of that attention probably came from men much older than myself at the time, to be so honest. But I also felt I built a community there that I cared about. So my videos way back then were mostly on cosplay, makeup, some Q&As that people had submitted, and video inspiration for me came so quickly and easily. I never really had to think about what I wanted to film next. It also didn't feel like a big deal to film or upload anything, or like I was acting really hard on camera or anything like that. It was really fun, especially at a time in my life when I felt there wasn't much to do nearby me that aligned with my interests, so things like anime, cosplay, K-pop, whilst those are like somewhat mainstream interests now. Back then, in a little kind of countryside town, there really wasn't much to do in-person community events, things like that, when you enjoyed stuff like that. But at this time, I also routinely struggled with some pretty major mental health issues. It's hard to call them major because I don't think I was ever considered that, but looking back, I think it was worse than I let on, both to others, but also to myself. I think I just pretended that I wasn't struggling as hard as I really was until like these kind of breakthrough moments where I was like, oh, this is pretty serious. I did find that keeping up this kind of online persona, who was definitely part of myself, but also partly exaggerated, helped me a lot at the time to connect to others around me when I was going through difficult times. And as I grew up a little bit and went to university, I wanted to film these kind of little moments of my life to remember the good things, because I found that holding on to those little moments really helped me get through each day. Ultimately, though, I became very weighed down by my mental health and even more significantly by my gender dysphoria. So in school, it felt like a natural waiting game until I turned 18 and had no control over my life, my body, how I was presenting. I kind of just felt really constrained with how I could present myself, and I also went to an all-girls school. So in that sense, unless I moved schools, I was kind of just stuck being called a woman, a girl, a lady, until I went to uni. So going to uni felt like it should have been a new start for me, except that didn't happen. I think I literally have a video up here when I was 16 where I changed my legal name. I got my legal name change documents. What I don't think I talked about there is that I actually didn't implement my name change until I went to uni, mainly because I was really worried that the name change between when I was doing my GCSE exams and if I changed it when I did my A-level exams, that my uni admission like the discrepancies between that would confuse people and that they would think I was like fraudulent. So I didn't actually legally implement my name change until I went to university, and it was relatively easy. That felt really good, and I would be coming out to almost everyone I knew, everyone I met, who I felt safe with, of course. But this did not change the fact that I was constantly perceived as a woman, and the means to change that was completely out of my control until I could be seen by my gender clinic, who I'd been waiting on for a year and a half by this point, I think, maybe 2 years. I've documented that process pretty consistently over the years. You can check out my transition playlist if you want to see me talk about getting onto testosterone. Naturally, I pinned a lot of my mental health issues on that, on my gender dysphoria, the lack of control, the fact that I was just literally never being seen as who I wanted to be. I'd say the core issue of my mood being so low all the time was down to literally feeling trapped and living on pause whilst others kind of got to live their, university fantasies. I don't know, I just felt like I lost a part of myself, a part of that experience that I was really looking forward to have as a man, not as someone who kept on being perceived as a woman. That's not to say that there weren't some beautiful moments throughout that time. I don't want to completely discard my uni years, but I was in some very dark places at that time, and I had also been in some dark places throughout my teen years before that too. It became really hard to kind of detach that constant anxiety and depression away from myself and my identity and to just live. However, after accessing testosterone and getting top surgery, my life changed significantly for the better. Again, I've documented accessing T, getting top surgery. I've done all the sappy talking about how gender affirming care saved my life. My top surgery was back in December 2019. Those next 3 months were some of the best I've ever had in my entire life. When I was healing and in pain and having all these difficulties with like healing post-top surgery, I still didn't care. I felt so happy, and I was just so grateful every day that I was alive and that my chest was flat and my voice was low and that I was growing facial hair and people knew and saw me as a man. Finally, I felt like this was what I'd been working so hard towards all this time. Obviously, COVID lockdown hit not soon afterwards in the UK, and the breakdown of my daily routine was really difficult to work with, and a whole lot of other people felt this way too. I think everyone can relate to how difficult that time was. I was also in my final year of uni, so I was trying to do my final project and, graduate, get my degree. And the change of responsibility, moving back in with my family, but into an entirely new home and city because my childhood home had been sold and my family had moved. These elements made it an even larger adjustment that I felt I had to cope with. And this adjustment kind of exposed a lot of these underlying issues that I never realized I'd really dealt with before. Because for a huge amount of my life, before 12 years old, maybe, I'd instead just felt completely weighed down by what I'd understood to only be bad mental health or low moods or, teenage girl drama, or then, further mental health issues stemming from gender dysphoria. It's quite noticeable to me. I don't know how noticeable it is to everyone else, anyone who followed me at that time, but after my original top surgery video, I didn't make another video for a year. And even then, the videos that I did make were fandom related videos where I wasn't facing the camera or it wasn't about myself. Even then, after those videos, it was a follow-up video discussing my revision top surgery. And after that, 4 years of no videos. I wanted to talk a bit about where I went, what happened during those 4 years, and kind of to the main point of the video, discussing my autism diagnosis. As I was saying, the breakdown of social routines, and also for the first time of my life being outside of any type of education, was really strange. There's no set routine to base your day, your weeks, your months after, aside from starting a career. I was searching for a job after, successfully graduating, getting my degree. Yay! For around a year post-graduation, I was searching for a job, and I was not getting much success at all, as many other recent graduates in 2020 could also attest to. It was fucking difficult, man. But my mental health at this time felt different. Because I could quite easily identify for the first time, this wasn't intrinsically linked to my gender dysphoria. Genuinely, I'd never felt this happy about myself. So I was trying to understand and pass through how much of this mental illness came from external factors, which would make a whole lot of sense. Major life-changing events, the switch up of routine, struggling to get a job, all of these things which are very valid reasons to feel like shit about yourself and about your life. And then I was trying to understand how much was actually instead a cause for me to be a bit concerned, like there was an actual thing going on. I was coping, but I wouldn't say I was coping a huge amount. And I actually here have with me the notebook that I used to journal at the time to let out some of my main frustrations. And I kind of documented the first inkling that I was struggling with something different that I'd never considered before. I wrote it down in September 2020. My ears hurt from nail clippers. Second time it's happened. Later on, obviously, I would learn that this is a sensory thing, and to this day, I still struggle with this, and also that I have tinnitus. That's very fun. But then I was also documenting other things, like the smudges on my glasses are much more annoying than I ever remember them being. And shops became so overwhelming with the music, the number of people, the fluorescent lights. I put this down to being out of practice due to the fact that, lockdown was really significant, and a lot of other people discussed how they'd struggled going shopping nowadays, and it was way more difficult than they remembered. I gave myself a lot of leeway to try to convince myself at this time that we're all just adjusting to a new type of life and everyone's feeling very overwhelmed all the time. This can't be that. This can't be this big thing. But there came a point where there was also just a whole load of other things, sensory, communication, emotional issues that I could just not explain away to myself. I was struggling a lot to express how I felt, specifically like a loss or a regression of language. And I just figured there were times where I just felt like I needed to crawl out of my own skin immediately. Like all of these really overwhelming, what felt like dramatic, exaggerated thoughts, emotions, like this build-up, I just could not understand where they were coming from. On top of all that, at this time period, I also realized that there were other things that I had been struggling with for most of my life without realizing what exactly they were, or things that I'd done my entire life without noticing what they were. So I very specifically remember always being kind of told that I should get a hearing test because I was struggled to hear a lot of the time what people were saying, particularly in public or louder environments. I could just never fucking understand what people were saying. And I was like, hang on, maybe that's not a hearing problem. Maybe that's a processing problem. I'm not going to share too much, but one thing I did want to share is when I was younger, I used to stim, and I did not know what stimming was. I did not know that I was stimming. I do remember that at one point I became embarrassed of doing it, and I told myself I would never do it in public or in front of anyone. And what I used to do was I would used to hold a stick or a pen, something like this. I would just do that. I would do that with a stick, and I'd make noises like people were talking when I did this. And I always remember kind of my family called it that I was away with the fairies, like I was talking to myself. Apparently I used to do it when I was running or skiing. I'd be skiing down a ski slope and I'd just be like I don't really remember the noises specifically that I made because I got embarrassed by it. People would point it out, and I was kind of like, this seems like a childish thing. This seems like something like having an invisible or imaginary friend. I thought it was something that I had to grow out of. So I would do it in secret, even as a teenager, and I'd be like, what the fuck am I doing? I don't know why I'm doing this. It just makes me feel positive and happy, and it feels like it's letting out all this pent up stress. I'd say I still haven't fully learned how to do that in public. I don't think I ever will. But yeah, I do like waving my hands. It feels fun. It feels nice. Sorry, that was a little tangent. After doing some research and sitting with this for a while, also trying to explain it everything that I could, because it was kind of terrifying to consider that this was what was happening, I realized that a lot of what I was struggling with aligned with autism. But this really fucking scared me. It felt like too big to be applied to me, too much. I couldn't qualify for something as serious as that. Now I know that there were always these things about me. I just never had an understanding of what they meant, and I'd hidden a lot of it to my detriment. Come December 2020, and I was really struggling, to be honest. I'd officially moved out of London, where I studied for uni, and I was kind of begrudgingly accepting that I had to set up a new life for myself now in the north, where I lived with my family, and that I didn't have any friends nearby me who I could see easily, or a community that I could access easily because, you know, I didn't have any income. I still couldn't find a job, and I didn't have the income to support myself to go visit with these friends or move out and be somewhere else by myself. And also, it being locked down, there wasn't any kind of in-person community events happening at that time. You can see, actually, I think I left some footage in my revision top surgery video. At the end, you can see that I get very frustrated with myself. I'm really sorry, I've kind of become quite bad at communicating lately, tripping over my words. I'm sorry, this probably hasn't been a very coherent video. I tried, I made notes. I was just like struggling to get my words out, really struggled with it. It was just a really bizarre time where I truly felt that I could not do anything right. Like, I couldn't speak, I couldn't regulate my emotions. I was like, what am I doing? I can't get a job, can't make friends, can't go see my friends. I was like truly just like down in the fucking dumps. But in December 2020, I decided that I just had enough of living this way. Like, it gets to a point. And I essentially went to my local mental health website and I gave him a call and I just explained everything that I'd been dealing with lately. The woman on the other end of this call, who to this day I still consider an absolute angel. After I had explained how I felt, and I haven't mentioned anything about potentially thinking this was autism, she actually asked me if I'd ever been screened for ADHD or autism before. And in that moment, I remember just being so fucking relieved. After talking a bit more, she referred me to a waiting list. I believe this was a waiting list just to have like an initial questioning to then be put on the official autism assessment waiting list. So yeah, I knew that it would be a waiting game from then on, but like, babes, at this fucking point, all I've been doing is waiting. The miracle of this story is that not even 2 minutes after I put down the phone, she called me back and she was basically like, okay, this thing that you're going to be waiting for, this phone call that they're going to give you, is basically going to be the same questions that we've already talked through today. So just stay on the phone with me if you're okay. Do you want to spend 5 more minutes? Let's talk through some more questions. I'll get it written down for you and I can get you put on the waiting list for an autism assessment today. Yeah, I was so shocked. This is really unheard of in any service, mental health service in particular, that I'd ever accessed. And I was just so thankful she did this because I imagine it did shorten my waiting list significantly, my waiting time significantly, not list, sorry. We're going to fast forward to a little under a year, and we're in October 2021. And this was when I was first contacted by an autism assessment centre, an official outsourced, subcontracted, essentially autism assessment centre from the NHS, who'd reached out to me to complete an online questionnaire. So this was essentially filling out forms with what I was experiencing, all that jazz. To be honest, I don't really want to get too in depth about this. Like, it's a lot of private things, but also I don't think it brings much merit to this video. One thing that I did want to bring out, however, from filling out that form all the way through to today, retrospectively realizing that a significant number of my behaviors, my thoughts, my struggles, my social interactions can be associated with me being autistic has been positively life-changing. I want to talk a bit more about that a little later on. Let's continue with the timeline. At that point, I'd actually been successfully employed for around 4 months, which was the longest I'd ever held down a job. So I was very proud of myself, but I was struggling quite a bit. I had reached that wall. I just felt very overwhelmed all the time, and I feel like I had no clue how to navigate anything. So when I'd filled out and submitted that questionnaire, another questionnaire went to a close person to me who's known me my whole life, and they call this an informant, which that's a bit of a weird word. Sorry, I just had to do a quick mic check. So this informant gives their perspective of things, some facts, opinions. Some of the questions were very similar that were given to the informant that were also given to me. After these forms were sent in October, my informant had, I believe, an hour-long appointment where they essentially were asked very similar questions again. They discussed the questionnaire that was submitted and kind of just to get a basis and understanding of developmental questions and how I grew up, how I developed. After this, I was then shortly offered an appointment for myself alone with 2 assessors. And this was in early November, the 7th, I think. Again, I don't really want to go into much depth on the actual assessment. For those of you who have gone through this, you probably know it's humiliating, it's demeaning. I felt like I was a child rather than an adult, and it was weird, but it happened. I passed. Flying colours. Fast forward again, but not really significantly because it was on the 13th of November, so less than a week later, that's when I got the phone call that I showed earlier, confirming that I'm autistic. Looking kind of back getting through this process from beginning to end, it did happen quite rapidly, particularly nowadays in the UK. I know that waiting lists have been significantly extended. And I feel so lucky to have eventually trusted myself and my mental health, and to know that something was still not right. After all these years, I was kind of like, no, I feel like there's still something missing here. Like there's something that's not quite clicking. I knew I had to believe in myself more, especially after years of like all these diagnoses that I just felt weren't fully correct. That's not to say that I wasn't depressed and that I wasn't anxious, but it's now understanding that what could be seen as generalized anxiety disorder is just anxiety from being autistic. Oh my god. After my diagnosis, there was a huge period of time where I was just dealing with anger and with frustration. Grief was a really big one, but also relief and gratitude and many other emotions when you're late diagnosed in particular, where you're grieving this life that you feel you should have had. There is definitely pros and cons to being early diagnosed. I only had the life that I've had because I was late diagnosed, and who knows the way that things would have changed if I was early diagnosed, and it may not necessarily have been for the better. I think the main thing you're sat there thinking is like, how on earth did it take this long? Retrospectively, you look at everything that's built up your life and you're like, oh my god, it's so fucking obvious when you look at it like that. But with time, things got easier. I disclosed my autism at my job, and I had some accommodations made for me that just have made my life so much easier. That's not to say I still don't struggle, but there were certain things that I just needed at my job that I don't think I would have been able to access without a formal diagnosis and without an occupational health assessment in light of me being autistic specifically. So yeah, that eased a lot of my concerns and my difficulties there. I understood myself better. I then went and read up a lot about neurodivergence, neurodiversity models, and I found others who I felt I could talk to freely, others who are like me. I learned more about myself as time went by, and to this day I'm still learning new things about myself and how to manage my life and live in a way that feels much more comfortable and accessible and accommodating to myself. That being said, I am currently going through pretty rough burnout right now. Clearly, I have still not learned how to give myself a fucking break, or to prevent burnout, or how to cope during burnout. I don't know, that's one of the hardest ones, man. It's been a really tough year. I'm just glad that I have a much improved framework of understanding for myself on how to cope and how to live my life in a way that makes things a little easier. But to get back onto the YouTube topic, this feels like a bit of, I'm trying to like shoehorn this YouTube thing in, but how this all links back to me not making videos for 4 years and different types of videos that I make. Well, naturally, when you grow older and you get a full-time job and then you get a life-changing diagnosis, making videos is not your first thought. It is also not your 10th thought. I had no drive to make videos. I didn't have any video ideas. I didn't feel like I had anything interesting or important to talk about. And I felt that also most of my previous audience had kind of checked out and grown up themselves and maybe didn't have the same interests. But over the past year, I really had been thinking about coming back and making videos again. And it was mainly through my passion of books and reading, getting really back into that, loving talking about books, and then also loving hearing others talking about books. I was kind of like, this might be what makes me come back. If you have stuck around for all of these years, oh my god, I love you. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, I'm amazed that you're still here, because I'm a very different person, but also not really. I feel like I need to get back a bit more to my 15-year-old self and just be a bit more of a freak. What can you, my dear viewer, take from this video? My main piece of advice, if you're ever struggling with anything similar, is to really be your own advocate, is to trust yourself, because I think if I hadn't trusted myself, I wouldn't be here today in the way that I am. And if I didn't also have like a great support network to lean on, for me, I knew that at some point something had to give. I knew that I had to get a formal diagnosis in order to access the accommodations at my job, and that enabled me to then stay at that job and to also be happy. I also knew that I wouldn't really believe in myself without that diagnosis, and that it's what I needed to give myself a break and to relearn what I needed to cope. And also just how to reframe how I'd viewed life up until that point. All of these things that I just had to completely relearn in the context of being autistic, and how that looks a little different. So yeah, thank you for listening to my story. If you've watched this all, you are a trooper. Bye bye.